Thanks, John. Let me first just say how great it has been to work with John and the rest of the group in putting this together. I couldn't have asked for a better partner in helping organize this. I've been in Phoenix for about 4 years. In fact, I parked in my usual parking spot this morning and walked the 3 blocks to get over here. So if any of you have time, want suggestions or directions for things, please ask. It's supposed to be 90 today, mid-80s tomorrow. Probably not a better place in the country to be this weekend than here in Phoenix. So hopefully some of you will have a chance to take advantage of that. As John was talking, I was thinking, I've been in a position of hiring people for about 17 years. And from the standpoint of what leaders do, hiring people is probably the most important thing that's done. And it really is a two-way street. What I want to try and convey to you is the importance of that relationship, but also the ways that you can, as faculty, new faculty, can position yourselves to be successful in this partnership. You have to, as John just said, the NIH is here to help you. Well, your chairs are here to help you as well. Their legacy is what you do. You are their legacy, and so they have every interest in trying to make you be successful. And there are things that you can do to help on your end of it too, and that's what I'd like to talk to you about this morning. So I think one of the important things is to really understand what it is you're wanting to achieve. And many times, I think it's easy if you think of your first job as not necessarily your last job. In some cases it is, but in many cases you might stay there for 3 to 5 years. And think about, if you think about that smaller chunk of time, it's sometimes easier to make some of the decisions that are ahead of you. Hopefully during this time you'll get your first grant. And once you get, although now oftentimes the first grant is achieved at 42. So it may be, that would be the first R grant. So it may be that you're getting a K award or some other grant. If you have a grant, then you become more portable, more attractive other places, and you can then start thinking about what you might do. But your first job really is to be setting the stage for your initial grant support. There are some correlations between experience and success. I'll show you a few of these data. This is looking at success in getting an award over the course of time. So a couple of things. One, unfortunately these curves are drifting downwards, not upwards, saying that it's harder and harder as time has gone on to get grants. Hopefully there will be a deflection upwards. If this were current 2016, we would perhaps be seeing somewhat of a move up, but over the past decade it had been a drift downwards. But one of the things I wanted to point out was the difference in the solid line at the bottom is first-time grant applicants versus experience, which is the top line. So doubles, if you had experience, it doubles your chance of success. So when you look at overall funding rates, if you're a first-time applicant, you're not as likely to be successful. So keep at it. You'll hear the funding rates, you'll think, gee, I should be at that level. But first-time people tend to be about half as successful. Same is true if you're MD, PhD. One of the other things to point out, both the downward trend that you see, but also there's not a whole lot of difference between success based on if you're MD only versus MD, PhD. First time goes up 0.1%. In looking at where in your training your PhD was received, this is looking at the advantages of being in MSTP programs, of which many of you are. These would be MD, PhD programs within medical schools. That group of people seems to be amongst the most successful. Similar study that we did a number of years ago at Mayo looked at this question as to when in your course of training a PhD was received, if you had both an MD and a PhD degree. And the most successful group were those that received their basic science training, not necessarily a PhD, as part of an accelerated residency program between residency and fellowship, followed by MD, PhD students, and then people who came to medical school with a PhD, and then those who are in NIH training grant award, so during their fellowship. So it does seem to make a difference. Now you're where you are, but this just shows that when you received your science training can be important. When we look at someone that we're contemplating for hiring, we're really looking oftentimes at what we see on paper. What's their track record of productivity look like? And so in many cases, start with abstracts, but then it's papers. And many times it's unlikely but possible that when you're applying for your first job, you'll have a grant. We also want to see a person who's engaged but not overly engaged. One of the things I think all of us were struck by as we reviewed your CVs, John had mentioned this, you are an amazing group. Sometimes we just had to step back and be awed at how much you as a group had accomplished as far as the number of papers and how much you had done. So I think take comfort that you're amongst the best of the group, and your likelihood of success is already high. And I think for those of us who worry about the future of the field, you're making us feel really good about that. I think one of the things that I like to see is this accelerated trajectory. I used to, in a different role when we were looking at applicants for medical school, college students who'd kind of taken off the last year or so oftentimes were not that promising as applicants to medical school. You wanted to see somebody who is on an upward and accelerating trajectory for whatever the next level is. So if you feel like you've done everything you need to do and you're going to coast for a little bit, not a good sign. So you want to be able to show that you really are generating a lot of activity, because now whoever hires you, they're going to harness whatever momentum you have or don't have. And so be prepared to demonstrate positive momentum when you start talking to somebody. If you have grants that are submitted, those make a big difference. I think our university president really likes to measure proposals. He said if a grant doesn't get funded, that's someone else's problems. They just didn't see how good the science was. I wish that were always true, but I think that it does mean that there's a lot of value for getting the grant, the organizing the thoughts, the product that you have, because sometimes it really is just an idea looking for a market. You're going to be paid for the work that you do. And I think if people have a sense that you're a hard worker, that makes you a much more attractive candidate. So make it clear how hard you work. And I think many times you won't have a chance to even show that unless you have a good CV and bibliography. So those are really your introduction for an academic job. Make those as good and as strong as possible. Don't pad them too much. Sometimes we see people who put in extraneous things, or you worry that, boy, this person has so many outside interests, will they ever get around to doing the work that you're hiring them for? So be careful about that, but also let it be a reflection of who you are, because that's really, in many cases, we'll see dozens and dozens of CVs and applications, and something amongst that has to make it stand out to get the initial interview. I think it's important that you know what it is you want to achieve. Go with where your interests are. People who are doing what they're wanting to do are more likely to do more of that and do it well than people who are doing something that they think is what someone else expects of them. So spend time knowing what it is that you want to do. So many different options now available. You can do basic work. We've seen a lot of you who are interested in doing that. There's clinical work, and now there's even health delivery. You're going to hear, the next talk is going to be from somebody who knows more about this than almost anybody in the country, and I think you'll see how important a field this is, health delivery sciences. One of the questions you have to ask yourself also is how much clinical work you plan to do. And some of this is not your decision. It's oftentimes the decision of the institution that you're planning to join. If you go to a place that has, just as an example, has had an exodus of people at the faculty level, and you're now a junior person, and they have a busy clinical service, guess what? You're going to be doing a lot of clinical work. And so you want to be aware of the circumstances as far as the clinical expectations, because ideally you'll do some, but you won't be overwhelmed with it, because this is really your chance to launch your career. And if your time is consumed by clinical duties, that may be challenging to do that. Many of you will, and I hope do, have administrative aspirations. Try and keep these in check for a little while. Participating is a good thing, but too much participation, again, just like the clinical work, can be a distraction for what you're trying to do is establishing your career. So I think that you have to come up in your own mind as what the right balance is, and this will change. Many times as people have more time in the position, they'll start taking on administrative duties, but I think it's detrimental to be saddled really with administrative roles and responsibilities from the outset. It keeps you from achieving what you need to do, getting the papers out and getting the grants submitted. At some point you'll be able to do that, and many people find that a very satisfying part of their career, but not as a place to launch. And then you'll hear more, and there's issues of work-life balance. This is important to be thinking about. There's few things that disrupt a career more than social interruptions. So a lot of times people think all they have to do is do their work, and then something bad happens in their family situation, and all of a sudden all that hard work just sort of takes a back seat. So you have to be aware of the people around you and maintain those relationships. Come up with some work-life balance for yourself. It's important for your career. Spend time with your chair. I've already mentioned that your chair is really, they have a huge interest, huge stake in your success. So if you can spend time with them and you're in alignment with their goals, if your goals and theirs align, you're going to, I think, be more successful. And when you're being interviewed for a job, you're also interviewing them. So make sure that you're what they're wanting, and that is what you want, and that you think this is a person you can work with. If you don't like the person, that's probably not going to be a good fit. And they'll be on their best behavior just as you will be. So if you don't like it at the interview, it's probably not going to get better. And then I think be certain that you understand what it is they're really hoping to achieve, so that you can, where possible, bend your goals or align them. I think it's important that you choose what you want to do. A number of you have already chosen or are moving towards a career in the basic sciences. That's a different type of career than a person who's involved with clinical or patient-based research. Both can be very satisfying. They're different. And if you're going one way or the other, make certain that your mentors are aligned with the path you've chosen, and that your job expectations are aligned with the path that you've taken. I think one of the other areas that's really emerging, and some of you are involved in this, is tapping into some of these large existing databases. Some of the inferences that can be made now, and we're able to look at data from several thousand patients, have really been eye-opening. And it's a specific skill that allows people to do that. If that's what your interest is, make certain that you make that clear, and that the position that you're in is able to support that. How do you choose the mentor? Well, this is important. You oftentimes have that as a choice. You can look at what a person has done. And of those of you who buy stocks, you'll see that on the prospectus it says past performance does not indicate future. And so that's kind of true, but it's not exactly true. I think if you look at mentors, you want to find people who've had a track record of success. But sometimes that success has led to their own personal success as well, and now they're very busy doing other things, and so their ability to serve as a mentor now might be different than it was 5 years ago before they moved into a position. So a person who's seldom had successful fellows, probably probably not good. But someone who has a track record of successful fellows, you look at what their former fellows have done, where they're positioned, you want to be like that, good choice. But just be sure before committing that that person hasn't had a change in their circumstances so that they're not going to be able to devote the time that you need as their mentee. I think the other thing that's important is to pick good projects. You want to do something that's important, but you don't want to do something that's so important that it's infeasible. On the other hand, you don't want to do something that's very easy to do, but really has very little relevance or long-term. So this is one of the challenges in where the mentor can be so helpful, to help you scale the type of project that you're doing. Pick something in a field that you think will carry you forward, has a possibility of being a career path, but something that's achievable. People who have great ideas but can never really get a paper, an abstract or a paper or a grant out, that idea will just wither. There was a book written now 30 years ago, In Search of Excellence, and in that book they say good ideas are a dime a dozen. It's the ability to execute that counts. And some of you probably weren't born when that book was written, but that's sort of one of the very frequent quoted management book. But it really, I think, emphasizes the importance of being able to produce, because that's what you'll be measured on in many cases. And then I think the other thing is just to be sure that, I mentioned this earlier when looking at the clinical expectations, also look at the resources overall that an institution has. Probably not a surprise that there are about half a dozen people from University of Michigan here. Michigan is a terrific institution with many resources, and you'll sometimes see success clustering. I've been at Mayo, Mike Camilleri is at Mayo. The Mayo Clinic would be another example. A number of you have had training there. So I think that's one way of trying to think about it. So not only are you looking at the mentor, but you're looking at the setting. Is this a setting that has been able to successfully groom people to be successful in academic careers? And you sometimes, most centers don't publish that, but you can usually ascertain that if you look carefully. The mentor is sometimes, there really are kind of two mentors, I would say. One is a scientific mentor who helps you with projects and makes decisions about that. And another is a career mentor. And they can sometimes be the same, but they don't always have to be the same. Sometimes you want to have a career mentor that isn't asking you, how are you doing on that paper? Where's that project? Are you doing this? Because the scientific mentor will ask you that. They're really trying to keep your scientific career in alignment. But it's unlikely for your scientific mentor to say, oh, don't worry about getting that paper done. Why don't you take a weekend off and spend some time with your family? Maybe they will, but that's more likely to come from your career mentor. So you probably need both perspectives. I think that the other thing to remember is this is really for you. It's not so much for them. So find somebody who you think has your interests at heart rather than you serving their ego. And then this is not, everyone is busy. And I know for the people I have mentored, if they make an effort to connect, I'll always do that. But it's them that sometimes have to make the effort, because I think from a mentor's standpoint, sometimes you assume, well, it must be fine. They're not really asking anything, and you're really busy anyway, and so you're not really looking for another cup of coffee. But if a mentee says, can we talk sometime this week? I'd like to get a cup of coffee. The mentor will do that. But that's part of your role as the mentee, to culture that relationship. I think as you look at positions, try and understand the local culture. Some cultures, some institutions are very collaborative, and others are just the opposite. They're very much individually initiated. So in some cases, if you are in a collaborative institution and you want to work by yourself, you'll stand out, not necessarily in a good way. If you're in an institution that values individual achievement, your interest in collaboration may not be seen as a strength. one of the, just to go back again to this whole concept of the type of research you want to do. If you're doing patient-based research, you need to develop a strong clinical base, patient base. So be certain that you look at that as part of what you do. It's for those of us who do clinical research, where it works best is when our practice is really made up of our research subjects. Some institutions are terrific at developing that, where the practices can be molded to fit a person's clinical research interests. Others, there's no chance. It's a very general practice, and there's really very difficult time in developing that practice to support your clinical research. So be aware of that. I think at some point you have to make a decision about how involved with education you want to be. Very satisfying part of an academic career. There's probably a time and place for that. It's sort of like administration. For an academic career, most of your initial success will be measured on your research activities and productivity. There is a time to educate. Many of us, I suspect everyone in this room who has had a successful career would say that their fellows and students are the mainstay of the academic engine, and so at some point you have to engage with the fellows. You're on the other end of it. You're doing the work right now for the senior people, but probably 70–80% of papers have a fellow as a first author that come out of GI division. So it's really a person who doesn't want to engage with the fellows is losing a huge opportunity. So it's something you'll need to figure out that transition at some point early in your career. And I've already mentioned the administrative duties. As best you can, try and avoid those early on. It can be attractive. The chief will make them sound attractive to you, but just say, let me think about that, or can I think about that over the weekend? Don't say yes right away for sure. So I think write constantly, try and get as many papers out, get grants out. Remember that concept that the proposal is what matters. That the idea is good, someone will buy it. I've liked reviewing other people's work. Not totally spending your time doing that. One of my administrative assistants had to give a report to me about what she'd done for the year, and it had been, one of the things she had done, it was 50 reviews. I had not realized I was reviewing a paper every week, but it's one of the ways that some of the more senior people keep up with the field. You shouldn't do that many for sure, but don't be afraid of periodically reviewing a paper, particularly if the work is germane. It gives you ideas. It lets you see how other people write papers or grants. It gives you a sense of what you can be doing. It's a great way of looking sort of under the hood at how a product is put together. And then I think the other thing, you have to be seen as a good citizen in your division. So if there are things you have to do them. Don't go out of your way to do too much extra, but make certain that you're seen as somebody who's part of the team. I think it's also where you can always try and be well perceived by the group that you're working with. There are always these subtle things that if you're well liked, opportunities to present. If you're sort of on the outs, opportunities that might have gone your way may not go. So be certain to do what you're supposed to do. Don't make enemies. So easy to make enemies. Pointless for doing that. Very, very few times when I can say that was really smart to tick somebody off. Usually just the opposite. And I think the other thing is, I mentioned earlier, you want to be seen as someone that the fellows want to work with. So participation, availability, visibility are important parts of that. Remember, they will be your best friends as you're moving forward, just as your mentor's best friends right now. You want to be seen as someone that people want to work with. You're not always ticked off about something, or just think. You want someone who wants to work with you, not the opposite. And I think that starts to be true not only locally but nationally as your career starts to unfold, as you get asked to sit on committees or do a variety of other things, which ultimately helps raise your visibility and makes you probably more likely to get grant support. I think the other thing, a couple of other things, be confident about what you've done. I've seen some people who they get a paper and it's rejected. And it's like, oh my God, I'm just worthless. You know, how could someone reject it? Well, I would say, I'd ask Dr. Camilleri, who probably has the most papers in the room, but Michael, how many papers have you had that have been accepted outright? 2. So this is a very low percentage. I've had 1. So expect that. You know, that's just part of it. Don't let that throw you off. Just they're going to make suggestions. Some will be good, some will be bad, but you know, be confident that what you've done is right and that you'll be able to address the questions. And then the same is going to be true for grants. Most grants, especially your first grants, aren't going to get accepted. But if they get scored, there's a high likelihood that they will. It's one of the things I tell medical school applicants is that if you look at a particular school, your chances of getting in are about 1 in 100, 1 in 50 for a particular school. But if you look at people who go to medical school, 1 in 2 go to medical school somewhere. Sometimes 50% are reapplicants. Students apply to many, many different schools. And so it's that persistence, that willingness to try other venues that eventually allows you to be successful. So keep submitting. One of the things you can do is to be visible locally. That was particularly true for those of us who developed a clinical research program in which we needed to attract referrals, patients with specific diseases. So talks locally or regionally, eventually nationally, will draw those patients. I think it's also important to write. It's very difficult to see how watching, in my case, a football game would be more valuable than working on a review paper. You might think it would be, but it usually isn't. So I think the more you can write, it keeps your name out there. Some people will read it. They'll say, I saw that article you wrote in the blank about this disease. I have a patient with that. Can I send them to you? And so I think that's particularly germane. It makes you think differently. If you're immersed in the literature, you're coming up with ideas, you're refining your thinking. And so this is really, part of what we do both locally, regionally, and nationally. This is a way to, I think, to stay on track of what's going on in the field. I feel like I never know more about my field than when I've had to write a review or give a state-of-the-art talk. It forces you to know that. You see sometimes where the gaps in knowledge are, or you fill in your own gaps in knowledge of where the field has gone. So anything you can do to keep yourself current is important. I've mentioned already reviewing papers and grants and the value of that. And go to meetings. This one, national meetings, are helpful for keeping up. As much as you can do, stay involved with your field with some of the caveats about work-life balance, but if you have an option to do something that might contribute, it can make you visible, that's only going to help your career. I think I'm just going to skip this. There are people who know more about some of the things that lead to grant support. So I think the final thing I wanted to say is, as you're doing things, write things down. What you're thinking about, what you're finding. If you have a laboratory program, of course, you need to be recording data. But it also is just good to keep ideas in mind, too. I think your reading will do that, but one way of, if you're giving a lot of talks, sometimes you read something, you abstract the data to make a slide. That reminds you of what you've read, helps underscore the importance. And then I think eventually, at some point, if you're writing basic papers in particular, you need to remember the details because you have to make your method section true and readable. So be certain that you are recording the conditions you've used for your experiment. So there really isn't any single path for a successful academic career. I think hard work, perseverance are two of the the keys, and then if you're optimistic about what you're going to achieve, that'll spread to others around you, and I think you'll highly be successful. This group, I really have no doubts about it, given your success already. So with that, I'll close and introduce John Allen, who's our next speaker.